Darcblade in Sunbreak, or in Monster Hunter games in general, is often perceived as a complex weapon. Whilst people familiar with the weapon may not think this, having long since understood its general gameplay, for newer players, it can be very daunting to pick up. This is exacerbated by the complexity of set building in Sunbreak, with the Augment and Charm system, the huge list of skills, and the direction of the game basically splitting Darcblade into two distinct playstyles, SAED and CSS. As with the Switch X guide review, I will start by taking a look at the pinned guide on r/MonsterHunterMeta. This guide, by a hunter that loves Darcblade, as you can see, is 85 pages long, so no shortage of effort had been put into this. I've seen the creator of the guide asking a bunch of questions and seeking improvements on this subreddit, which is great. Initially this did concern me a little though, as that means the guide has been published and stickied while still being incomplete and or flawed. But having skimmed through most of these 85 pages, a lot of the information here is accurate and useful. Unfortunately, the sets are less than optimal. But I'm just going to skip through the parts that I think are informative and make sense. I'll be focusing on correcting stuff that I see which is wrong. The basic info on these first couple pages is good. The first issue I have though is with the appropriately labelled hot take that air dash isn't meta. I think Axe Hopper is super cool and fun, but saying it isn't meta is accurate. The axe hit at this stage in Sunbreak is less significant than the foul hits, and CPP often outclasses Axe Hopper by allowing for much more frequent SAED spam. However, air dash can absolutely be meta on CSS. The guide raises the issue of air dash being poor for positioning, which doesn't fully explore its utility. The move has a lot of vertical and forward movement that makes it perfect for two things: attacking flying monsters and continuing aggression on monsters that are flinching or moving away. CSS does have good reach, and you could just use a regular vertical swing to chase down monsters in these circumstances, but air dash has much higher motion values than just one CSS swing, and can do a huge file burst with element files at the end. And these two things in conjunction will build up a lot of mount damage. The M-Lag doesn't necessarily leave you vulnerable. The recovery from the axe hit is pretty quick, and you could just go in a ready stance when necessary, and the file burst basically lets you rocket jump away from danger. The super armor generally won't leave you with critically low health should you tank a move, and as mentioned here, is a great tool to maintain aggression and get some lifesteal against anomalies that inflict blood blight. And please don't feel obligated to slot evading standard just because you're running air dash, it is not a necessary skill tax. The combo guide is good, it's very informative about the basic moveset. So we're going to move on to the meta weapons section. The SAED meta weapons, they're all correct. With CSS though, I see it included both impact and LE file options for elemental weapons, which makes sense I guess. I'm surprised at the presence of Flaming Espionage as a fire option, but it made sense after I tested it on matchups with lower fire hit zones. The weapon choices for elemental CSS otherwise look sound. I have to mention though that the Thunder impact file options are a lot weaker than the other elements, and Dragon impact file with Chaotic Gore is really annoying to build around. He makes a good point with impact file element options in solo play. The KOs you can net make them stronger in short solo hunts, but for long hunts or multiplayer, the higher damage of element file is superior. He included every status here, but realistically paralysis, sleep, and the no status raw options suck. Blast and poison are really the ones you want to be using for raw CSS. However, his poison options aren't the best. Lucid Nagakuga Darcblade is the strongest for poison CSS, and Flaming Espionage should really not be considered as a raw option. The info on augments is good. With decorations though, everything is fine until I see the Razor Sharp and Defense Grinder recommendations. Full respect here for saying Protective Polish is a garbage skill, and I absolutely agree. But it is baffling to me that he would recommend Razor Sharp on a CSS set. CSS wants to be running at 100% affinity, so there is no downside to taking Master's Touch over Razor Sharp. He says here, Master's Touch requires a master to use since you have to exclusively hit weak spots. I have two issues with this. First of all, I have faith in the average Monster Hunter player, and I believe they have enough brain cells to rub together to consciously and intentionally target weak spots. Second of all, with 100% affinity, 50% of this affinity is non-weakness exploit. Hypothetically, if you always miss the weak spots, God forbid, you're still getting 80% Master's Touch on a 50% crit rate. That's 40% sharpness sustain, which is already almost as good as Razor Sharp. Should you improve your play a little and hit weak spots a quarter of the time, you get 100% crit rate a quarter of the time, and you get 50% crit rate 3/4 of the time, On average, that gives you a 62.5% crit rate, which translates to a 50% sharpness conservation rate with Master's Touch. That's how low the requirement is for Master's Touch to surpass Razor Sharp. You only need to hit weak spots once in every 4 swings. Defense Grinder on SAED, well, he's not wrong about anti-species barely contributing, but I'd much rather have Ellenbane on applicable matchups, or Bloody Heart against non-Ellenbane anomalies. It's a pretty funny recommendation to be honest, but unfortunately SAED doesn't care for sharpness anyway. His guard list is very comprehensive and there's some great info that's hard to find elsewhere, so props to him for this. This is one of the main things I saw him asking for in the subreddit, and that's great that he's compiling this knowledge. I'm gonna skip the progression sets though, as to be honest I have no clue when it comes to progression. What I really want to get into is the endgame stuff. So, the sets are split by title update, but the relevant ones are the bonus update sets. The first bonus update set is a Blood Awakening plus Dragon Conversion SAAD set with Dereliction and Strife. First thing I noticed is that it only has Element Exploit 1, but has all the element resistance decorations. SAAD wants to maximize element, and slotting all the LE res decos does maximize your display element, but this is less effective in practice than maxing LE exploit. Each hard resistance decoration only increases your final element value by 5, and that's assuming you're still under the resistance cap. Usually, since you can also eat element resistance dango, you won't need all 5 element resistance skills maxed to cap your dragon conversion element. But beyond this, element exploit is just far more efficient. The skill is front loaded with level 1 giving a 10% boost element, which is huge, while skills level 2 and 3 only give 5% in total. However, this extra 5% is still more than worth it, because 5% of your total element value will be much larger than the corresponding 5 flat element a resistance deco provides, so it is much more efficient to put element exploit rather than element resistance into a 4 slot. Should your resistances be overcapped with decos and dango, you might also want to consider swapping out element resistances to increase burst from 1 to 3. Alternatively, you can just drop levels of guard up for this. Very few monsters in the game actually require you to have guard up, so using 3 whole skill points on this is far from necessary. Burst 3 gives 7 more element at max buff than Burst 1 does, and the max burst buff does only apply after 5 hits, and you might be thinking, SAED only does 5 hits. But when you SAED, the axe hits twice, if you guard pointed you get a guard point hit, and any firing pins on the monster will also pop and contribute to stacking up to max burst. I also noticed this set does not have any Rapid Morph. All Rapid Morph does is speed up your SAED animation by a few frames, but this can actually have a massive impact. I always run Rapid Morph 3, and there have been countless scenarios where I've SAED'd and then barely recovered in time to do another CPP SAED. If I was a few frames slower, I would have lost both the chance to land another huge burst of damage, and I also would have gotten hit. Therefore, Rapid Morph is more important for your offense and defense and should not be neglected, particularly as endgame monsters attack faster and hit harder. Landing an extra SAED in certain windows is far stronger than having 5 more element. Another gameplay issue these sets might face is that some monsters, particularly at high anomaly levels or with the Elder Trio, take a long time for their paths to break. This set then faces the problem of having constant health drain from Dereliction without Blood Rite kicking in for several minutes. The fix for this is quite simple. You just take out an element resistance or guard up deco and slot in Bloodlust, which will give you some periodic healing until you get Blood Rite going, and is more convenient than sheathing and healing before part breaks kick in. On to the next SAED set, which uses Berserk and Mail of Hellfire, allowing you to always have both Strife and Blood Awakening buffs active simultaneously. This set has Guard 5 with an extra Embolden 3, Element Exploit 3 and Rapid Morph 3, which is good. A major problem I have with this though is that it is not built effectively for sustaining Berserk. A Berserk set must have Kushala Blessing 3, which ensures you can have positive health regen when you eat with Super Recovery Dango and or drink Immunizer. If you do not slot Kushala Blessing 3, your HP will decrease even if you have Super Recovery Dango and Immunizer active. With Berserk 1, your drain becomes unmanageable as soon as you take any chip, and this makes the set very uncomfortable to play with. Particularly since Chargeblade takes a long time to sheath, scroll swap and heal, and even when Blood Rite is active, if the monster doesn't give you SAED opportunities, your health is constantly draining. Even with Berserk 2, not having Kushala Blessing still makes it very uncomfortable. Power Prolonger 3 is questionable since firing pins can extend shield charge duration, and Guard Up 3 again is rarely utilized. These points could have been spent better maxing burst or acquiring Hellfire Cloak for a free topple and constant coalescence uptime. Next is the Element CSS Blood Awakening set. The SAD sets were on the right track, but these are very questionable. This set is only on 90% affinity, with 40% of it being conditional. I explained earlier why Razor Sharp 3 is just inferior to Master Touch 3. Guard 4 is a weird level of guard to have, as it's functionally just Guard 3 but costlier, and Guard Up 3 is usually superfluous, particularly on CSS, which would probably rather dodge Guard Up moves or air dash them, as it doesn't rely on countering. The biggest issue is that this set doesn't have any offensive guard or critical element. These skills are far more efficient than attack boosts in terms of increasing CSS damage. On elemental matchups, a well-built element file CSS set outputs approximately 65% raw and 35% element damage. Attack boost 7 increases attack by 10%, meaning each point contributes around 0.93% of overall damage. Offensive guard is a huge 15% buff to attack for only 3 points that is really easy to proc, and each of these points contributes around 3.25% of total damage. Crit element gives 5% element damage per level, which means it gives around 1.75% overall damage per level. Obviously, these numbers aren't perfectly accurate and are very approximate, but they should give you an idea of just how much more efficient these skills are than attack boost. His magnum opus, the Berserk LE CSS set, is still flawed. Guard 4 again, no offensive guard or crit LE again, only Strive 2 instead of 3. The biggest issue though is that there are no sharpness skills whatsoever. All that damage you're gonna gain with Berserk, Strive, Mail of Hellfire, Blood Awakening is gonna be nerfed if you just drop sharpness levels because you have no sharpness management. Ideally for these element CSS sets, he would have made separate templates for the charge blades with different base affinity, such as Rachna with 30, Mizu with 15, Kushala with 10 and Amatsu with -25, because Rachna and Amatsu in particular require unique builds. The Status CSS Lifesteal set is weird because he uses the Flaming Espinel CB as the default template, because it builds very differently to the raw focused status charge blades. It would have been better to prepare separate templates. This template as an element option has the same issues as the others. Guard 4, Guard Up 3, no offensive guard, no crit element. The set doesn't reach 100% affinity either, with just Weakness Exploit 3, Bloodlust 1 and Flaming Espinel CB's base affinity, it reaches 90%. Ideally he would have had a charm or augments that would allow for build up boost 3 and rearrange the decos to have less guard up, since whilst build up boost levels 2 and 3 are less efficient than level 1, they still are more efficient than levels of attack boost. Blade Scale Hone though is a really nice option with evasion sets and is probably enough sharpness management with the intended weapons. For the raw status option not pictured here, he would swap in more status trigger and handicraft. However, the lack of build up boost 3 really hurts the effectiveness of status trigger, missing out on an extra 10% damage boost when active. The lack of offensive guard also hurts here because on a pure raw set, it just straight up contributes 5% more damage per point when active, which is huge. Worst of all is that he doesn't mention the need to add affinity. With his recommended score on Charge Blade, it then only reaches 70% affinity, and with Gold Rathian Charge Blade, it only reaches 80% affinity. Lastly is an off-meta raw CSS set. Same issues here really. It has Guard 5 which is good, but still uses Razor Sharp despite capping affinity and has no offensive guard. I'm not gonna review the Impact SAD builds. They're not viable and not very fleshed out. So overall these sets are inefficient and miss out on a lot of key skills that will improve your practical damage output and hunting experience. The author has shown himself to be willing to learn and improve, which is good. But releasing this guide with half-baked sets as part of a meta compilation has probably misled thousands of people who use MHMeta as a source of information. And I wonder why nobody in the MHMeta or the Mathalos community has noticed the issues here or attempted to rectify them. If you want to see more efficient and affordable templates, check out the description for a link to a set guide that Timmy is compiling. He has tested these sets in gameplay and I've reviewed them, but if you find any possible improvements, please let us know. The author does write a final overview of Darcblade here, and I have to disagree with his perspective on morphing advance. Yes, it is a good move, but Darcblade hasn't lacked positioning as he states, but mobility, and it is true that morphing advance has greatly improved its mobility, but actual positioning is still the foundation of the weapon's gameplay. I don't think that morphing advance's mobility has been as revolutionary for Darcblade's matchups as he believes, because in Sunbreak the majority of SAEDs are executed off the real overpowered move, Counter Peak Performance, which just lets you sit and wait for the monster. The increased SAED angling of 5th generation games lets you target hit zones effectively without having to morphing advance. Now, on to some set guides I have found on YouTube. Quickly before I cover these though, I would like to explain why Guard 5 is important. Guard 5 is a damage skill. Rise introduced a switch skill, Countermorph Slash, that when executed as a guard point, boosts element file damage by around 20%. This massive boost means that players should always aim to do a Countermorph SAD when their files loaded. For general use sets then, it would be recommended to run at least Guard 5, because many monsters in endgame have moves that require at least this level of guard to guard point without taking heavy knockback. Heavy knockback is bad because it stops you from SADing after the guard point. Also, even levels of guard are basically useless. Guard 2 will take heavy knockback from anything Guard 1 takes heavy knockback from, likewise with Guard 4 and Guard 3. The reason why I'm discussing Guard is because many of the sets that will be shown don't have Guard 5. First, I'll start with some guides by someone who knows how to build and play Darcblade at a high level, iDeVaste or Deva. He has made 2 videos for TU5, one for an ice set, which can be substituted with any element, and one for a dragon set. For the general element set, he has a no curio template, a max modded augments template, and a no health drain template. The no curio template seems like it has been maxed out for element with this restriction, and is a good baseline from this perspective, but it has issues in terms of practicality. From what I understand, the intention here is to augment on 3 points of Furious to max out element later, and that would most likely use up 3 armor augments. Then with your remaining 2 unaugmented armors and whatever secondary skill you have in your charm, you will have the following gaps to fill: 4 levels of guard, 3 levels of rapid morph, 1 level of strife, but you can actually just swap out the element resistance decos and slot the guard and rapid morph, so it all works out fine. This means the template is good, but for less experienced players, they may not understand exactly how they should be developing the set and may not be aware that all these substitutions are necessary. Next is the modded augments min-max set. I'm pretty surprised that the set is only guard 3. This restricts you from getting big countermorph guard point SADs on many endgame monster moves, but the intention here was to reach the highest element possible, and as a modded augment set, it isn't practical for most players anyway. The no health drain template is another guard 3 set which I found strange, because he has Wirebug Whisper 3 and Windmantle 1 from Risen Kushala Helm. This isn't that necessary for SAD Darcblade, and having a more efficient helm could get the set up to guard 5, which would be comfier in comparison. At the end of the video, he makes a comment about how you could get a Berserk 2 charm with dragon conversion like it's easy.
But it's possible to get level 2 Berserk with level 2 dragon conversion on the charm. Berserk is a very comfy skill in endgame because it makes you truly immortal and prevents one-shots. You have enough time to heal yourself whenever the draining starts going close to 0.
I find that really strange, as that charm sounds very hard to get, and Berserk itself is a form of health drain and can be difficult for less experienced players to manage without the proper knowledge and preparation. With the Berserk set, you may as well build for Mail of Hellfire to boost your element without making you less survivable. Next are his dragon specific sets. His low budget set uses Storm Soul and Dragonheart and is very effective in reaching some high element numbers for low cost. This is another unfortunate case of guard 3, but it is a budget build. Issue is though that all the armor pieces that can get skill augments have been spent on dragon conversion. He mentions you get extra strife as augments, but that's not really feasible on these 2 augmentable armor pieces, and this low budget set can't really be developed, but it does its job as a late game progression option pretty well. The issue however is that Deva doesn't show a Dragonheart set that can be viably progressed into the full endgame. The guide then immediately covers a min-max modded augments build, which is not feasible for regular players, particularly those on Switch. The next set, No Health Drain, is weird. I don't understand why he even includes the Dragon Heart 3 option in the video. It simply doesn't work with No Health Drain. Like, what are you gonna do? Get hit and then have Dragon Heart? The actual usable version is build 3.5 with the Furious 3 charm. With Storm Soul 4, his Valstrax mail gives 2 Dragon conversion, and he gets the 3rd Dragon conversion from the charm. With a Furious 3 charm though, you'll probably not be lucky enough to also get Dragon conversion on it, so you'll probably have to then augment Dragon conversion on the Valstrax mail. Overall, Deva is a very good player and has really nice sets in his speedruns, but I feel his templates are too disconnected from the reality of the larger player base, and that he could have provided more practicality and guidance in his set creation and explanations. One of the worst guides I found were the Blood Awakening sets from LordViettner. The title says Dragon Conversion Chargeblade, but he says the set can be applied to any element, which is true. Unfortunately though, these sets are terrible. On Element SAD, your sword and axe hits or raw damage in general contribute under 20% of your total damage. Often it's under 15% even. So when I see that he is slotted in decos to get Weakness Exploit 3, Crit Boost 3, and the least efficient level of Attack Boost 5, I wonder if he actually understands how Chargeblade works. These skills do barely anything for your damage, and are a massive waste of slots. Guard 2 is functionally just Guard 1. Having level 1 of Element Exploit is awful. An extra 2 levels of Element Exploit will add more damage than all those levels of Weakness Exploit, Crit Boost, and Attack Boost combined. He shows an augmenting list of skills you want later, and there are some good skills in there, but with just 5 armor pieces to augment, there's no way you're getting that much extra Guard, Furious, and Element Exploit. He doesn't even mention that Furious 3 is the highest priority augment here for increasing elemental damage, whilst Attack Boost 6 to 7 is basically useless. Overall, this guide is horrible and shows complete ignorance of how SAD Chargeblade works. Next is a Dragon Conversion Chargeblade guide from Darcblade. His first skills page has mostly good stuff in it. Coalescence 3 is kind of inefficient though, since Coalescence level 1 only gives 2 element, and levels 2 and 3 give 1 element each. A level 4 element resistance decoration would have given 5 element, but the biggest issue here is the lack of guard. There is no guard at all in this set, meaning you will barely have any opportunities to countermorph and get 20% boosted files. The rest of the set is fine, but that is a massive omission that really ruins it overall. He says near the end that burst is optional and implies that SAD doesn't hit enough times to proc it. 1 hit is enough to get the baseline buff from burst, and it's a very important skill. He also has Heaven Set 1 here, which is really not that important. I also noticed that his augments were all rolled on Skills Plus. This is really bad for Dragon Conversion, as Skills Plus comes with a default -7 resistance to a random element. Overall then, he has a total of -35 element resistance from his augments, which decreases his final element value by almost 9. The last set guide I'll cover is from Yokai Nox. His first build, the Happy Hopper, is a Sleep Axhollow build. This is funny enough, but I'm not going to cover it. I'll just say that it's very off meta. Next is his Double Edge build, which is meant to be Hybrid Impact SAD and CSS, which is gonna be shit damage and also be very off meta. But the skills list actually looks pretty good overall, except he should have used Master's Touch over Razor Sharp. The comfy element template is Guard 3, which is sad and not comfy, and comes with Evade Extender 2 from the Furious Rajang legs by default, which I hate. But otherwise the skills list is kind of the stuff you need. His Max DPS stuff is less well constructed however. This Fire Water Ice template lacks any guard at all. Say goodbye to the extra 20% damage you get on countermorphs. I understand that it's at only Strife 2 because it's the unaugmented version, so I'll let that pass, but the Blood Right here will basically ruin your Strife buff once it starts regenerating your health. The Wirebug Whisperer 3 here is rarely useful, and there is no Repomorph 3, which means rather than getting extra SADs out of certain attack patterns, you will just get hit. Overall, this set is built very inefficiently. The Risen Camellia's coil in particular sucks. All it offers is Wirebug Whisperer 2 and 4A1, which are basically useless for SAD Chargeblade. The intention for this set is that 3 points of Furious get augmented onto it, but if you ran more Dragon conversion pieces and use a Furious Charm instead, it would be a much better base template. The Thunder template is Guard 1 only and also has no Rapid Morph. It starts on Strife 1, but the augmented version would get to Strife 3, and you could probably get more Element Exploit on it as well, which is great. Issue is though that he has basically sacrificed Furious 3 so he could fit Storm Soul 2. Furious 3 gives 20 resistance to all elements, which overall gives you 25 more element. Storm Soul 2 gives 10% more element. You would need to have 250 element before Storm Soul 2 is stronger than Furious 3, which is not feasible. Storm Soul can be better value when you are able to cap out all the element resistances or come close to it without Furious, but that's unlikely, and this set is probably just worse than the last one. The Dragon template is the closest one to being good, but it is still just on Guard 3. The set would be strong if he recommended augmenting for 3 more Strife, but instead he recommends augmenting for more Dragon conversion and replacing the helm and coil with Storm Soul pieces. So instead of getting 15% more element, he wants to get 10% more element and have armor pieces you can't augment seals onto. In summary, there are a lot of Chargeblade guides out there that don't truly understand how to optimize for elemental damage, or build for practical gameplay. Most notably the fact that most SAD sets didn't have Guard 5 or Rapid Morph 3, or that most CSS sets didn't have Offensive Guard, Crit Element, or proper sharpness management. I think it's very harmful when people who don't actually understand how a weapon should be built create their own guides and spread misinformation to the wider player base. Those seen as reputable sources for information by their fan bases should place greater efforts into ensuring that they really do know what they're talking about, and not just unintentionally misinforming or misleading people because they want to quickly create content for views. A greater amount of research and peer review, as well as gameplay testing, should be the standard, and as I said in the SwitchAxe video, only when you combine accurate mathematical optimization and extensive gameplay experience can you create a practical meta set guide. I will mention again that in the description below I have linked a set guide that has been created by Timmy, reviewed by me and tested by both of us, that includes templates for SAD and CSS sets, which are stronger than any others I've found online, while still being very accessible. Thank you for watching, and if you think I've said anything stupid, please let me know in the comments.